All right, we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. Thank you so much for coming out. I think the roads are finally clear, but it is very cold outside. My name is Brittany Short. I am the director of the Pumpkin Vine Trails Coalition here at the Community Foundation of Elkhart County, and just want to welcome everyone to tonight's talk. A couple of things that my team has asked me to share with you before we get going. Number one is that the restrooms, if you've not been here before, restrooms are on the lower level, out the back of the auditorium and to your left. Hors d'oeuvres and drinks are available in the lobby, so feel free to get up as needed and take advantage of those. Fable Books is here tonight. Thank you so much to them. They have all of our authors' books available and ready for purchase, and some other fun bike-related knickknacks out there too. If you have questions during our talk, we have a QR code. What you'll need to do is just aim your phone app, or your picture app on your phone at the barcode, and the link that pops up will take you to a form. Have that ready to go, and if we have time at the end, we might do some questions. If not, the team is going to get back to you after the event, and we'll get those questions answered. I also want to thank our partners. It takes a lot of organizations to make events like this happen. So a quick thank you to the convention, the Elkhart County Convention and Visitors Bureau, We Impact Group, the Community Foundation of Elkhart County, Pumpkin Vine Trails Coalition, and an initiative that kind of connects everybody, Vibrant Communities, for their support of this event this evening. I'm excited to now introduce our speakers this evening, Chris and Melissa Bruntlett. They're Dutch-Canadian authors and urban mobility advocates dedicated to building happier, healthier, and more human-scale cities. Melissa is the founder of Modacity Creative, and Chris is the International Relations Manager at the Dutch Cycling Embassy. Together, they've authored 3 books, including Building a Cycling City, Curbing Traffic, and Women Changing Cities. Please join me in welcoming them for tonight's talk, Cycling Towards Empathy, Reimagining More Inclusive Spaces in Our Communities.
Okay.
All right. See, I'm pressing it now.
This worked in the rehearsal, honestly.
There we almost. I'll try turning it off and on again.
Yes.
Perfect.
We are good.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight and for braving the cold, which for former Canadians should be fine, but we were living on the West Coast for so long and then now in the Netherlands, which is basically the same, that we're a little not acclimatized to this temperature. So thank you for reminding us why we moved first west and then very far east. But we're really happy to be here and happy that we could reschedule this event. Many of you are probably meaning to come and see me talk in October. Due to flight cancellation, very last minute from KLM, and just not being able to make it here on time, we had to postpone, but I'm glad that we were able to make it happen again. Feel free to send your complaints to KLM, but after tomorrow when we get on the plane to go home. But still, I'm super happy to be here, and I'm really happy that Brittany reached out to me like a year ago to come and learn about what's happening here in Elkhart County with the Pumpkin Vine Trails Coalition. And then, to be able to come and share what we do with you all.
As an added bonus of the cancellation, you get me.
Yeah, and now you get the dynamic duo. And that's the thing, as we knew we were coming back, and it was nice to be able to bring Chris along because this is work that we've done together. So with that, a little bit more about us. So we grew up in Southern Ontario, about an hour south of Toronto. Had that sort of suburban lifestyle before moving to the West Coast, and then eventually to the Netherlands that we've called home for 7 years now, becoming Dutch last year, really taking what started out as advocacy locally, just building upon that through storytelling to now be international representatives of Dutch cycling, but also international stories of inspiration of what's happening around the world. Like was said, myself through my consultancy, Modacity Creative, where I get to work with all types of organizations to help them realize not just communications, but a vision for, a more vibrant and welcoming urban space.
Yeah, and for my part, I have for the last 7 years worked with this fantastic nonprofit foundation called the Dutch Cycling Embassy. We're funded by the Netherlands national government, by the Ministry of Infrastructure as a form of two-wheeled diplomacy. So we are a knowledge-sharing platform, a form of international cooperation, and we work with cities, regions, countries around the world to learn from a lot of the best practices that we've written about over the years and to help translate them and adapt them to their own unique context. And it is a global mandate that we have. We've been to China, to India, to Latin America, and are doing plenty of work here in the US. We just came from Austin, Texas, which has been a valued client of the Dutch Cycling Embassy for almost 15 years now. So yeah, we hope to leave you with a little bit of inspiration about hopefully what the possibilities are, not to copy and paste the Netherlands, but to translate some of the things that they've learned over the years. So with that, yeah, we'll jump straight into it. I mean, as we said, Melissa and I have been at this for the better part of 15 years now, first as amateur advocates and then more recently as published authors and diplomats and consultants. But we look back on those 15 years and the various moves that we made to Vancouver, to Delft, where we live now, and a lot of the things that we were lobbying for, we couldn't quite articulate it in a form or a phrase. And in the first book, of course, we call it The Dutch Blueprint for Urban Vitality. But even then, when we wrote that, we didn't know at the time that urban vitality is actually a very well-defined term by the urbanist Jane Jacobs in The Death and Life of American Cities, her seminal book. She simply defined urban vitality as having three categories: that a space be welcoming to a variety of different types of people, ages, abilities, genders, ethnicities, to do a variety of activities, of course, not just the breadwinning economic work, getting from the house to the office, at a variety of the times of day, so morning, noon, and nights, all 4 seasons ideally. And then we added one fourth element to this that we thought was critically important, that we're also designing for a variety of modes of transportation, that it's not just about the private automobile as we have designed for many decades, but recognizing that everybody perhaps has their own preferred mobility device, and we should be welcoming as many of those as possible. Now, if we compare that beautiful definition of urban vitality to what we've actually built in a lot of our cities in those decades, we have a very contrasting picture. Of course, we're only largely designing for one mode of transportation at one time of the day, for one user type, and we're forgetting about all of those myriad other users of the city and uses of the city. And I think, again, Jen Jacobs articulated it perfectly, that through this period of time, by simply hyper-focusing on the problem of traffic, we think we've solved all of the other myriad problems of our cities and ignored them for a very long period of time. This was our children's route to school in East Vancouver. Despite the beautiful infrastructure the city was building, I think it really hit home for us as parents that we had to lobby for and ultimately advocate for systemic change.
So today's presentation is going to kind of cover all 3 books. Can everyone hear me?
Did your microphone go off?
I didn't touch anything, I swear. Well, if everyone can hear me, I will carry on, and then the sound will come back on in a minute. But yeah, so we're going to draw on the content from all 3 books in terms of what urban vitality means in our cities and why we chose to focus on that. And of course, we need to begin with why do we need that in our cities, and where it starts. There we go. Is with children. And that's it's why we made the move that we did to the Netherlands, was for our kids to enjoy that autonomy and freedom that we got to experience while on holiday for 5 weeks there. It's what we enjoyed as children in the early 80s. Perfect. There we go. And really, if we're looking at what the future of our cities should be, it really should be taking into account how do we give that freedom and autonomy back to kids. And so for urban vitality, it's taking into account that children can't drive until they're the age of 16. A lot of how they develop their worldview is based on how they move. And when they're moving around in the backseat of a car, they feel isolated from the world. They feel a little disconnected, definitely dependent on mom and dad or their caregivers to get them around. And so they're not learning these vital things in our lives about connecting with their communities, about learning how to navigate through their spaces and the different elements that make up the places and the people where they live. But they're also not getting the opportunity to learn about risk, which is a vital skill that we need to develop when we're younger so that as we age, we know how to manage where our limits are, where we can push a little bit further, where we maybe need to take a step back. And what we've seen in terms of the last 2 generations of kids is they've been that's been kind of taken away from them. And so when we're talking to cities, we're talking about giving that back to kids, that idea of letting them learn where their limits are, but also giving them that joy of moving around without the care and supervision of mom and dad.
Yeah. And then on the other side of the demographic spectrum, we have, what is now called the silver tsunami, an aging population that is, we've designed cities under the assumption that they can drive forever, and the fact of the matter is that we all eventually age out of driving. The American Automobile Association says themselves, 7 to 10 years we outlive our ability to drive safely, and when we lose that driver's license, which through reduced response time and visual acuity, we become isolated, we become housebound, we become institutionalized, dependent on others for our mode of transportation. We lose a lot of that freedom and autonomy that the car has provided for us without designing any alternatives into the city. And I think one of the things that really inspires us about the Netherlands is not just the free-range kids, but also the free-range seniors that are the 65-plus demographics, actually the ones that cycle the most, due to this great infrastructure that's being built. And for them, of course, it's much more than just a means of transportation. It's a means of continued participation in society. They can get everywhere they need to go, age gracefully in place in the community where they grew up, without being pushed to the sidelines and left behind.
So we talk about, making sure we're allowing for all ages. We need to be allowing for all types of trips, and that includes thinking about caregiving in our cities. I think in North America, we tend to view that as chaperoning our kids from one place to another, or going to do groceries with your minivan. But really, this idea that there is another way that we can do that. It's what Chris and I were fortunate enough to be able to do in Vancouver. Starting in 2010, we sold our family car and used biking, cargo bikes, car share, all of these things to move around our cities in different ways, or our city in a different way. And one of the reasons that was possible in Vancouver, and why it's definitely possible in Netherlands and places that are building out for cycling and creating these wonderful networks, is that it connects not just, as Chris mentioned earlier, these economic trips. So the A to B from home to work that we assume are the economic drivers of our community. It allows for a more networked approach of, connecting A to B to D to C over to E and all around again, making shorter trips much more realistic, that are usually, when it comes to caregiving, much shorter in distance. And, really allowing for those that provide that caregiving work another alternative to being trapped in an automobile moving around their city. And what we've come to appreciate is that, as Chris said in the second slide or third slide, it's about providing for all those varied trips that make our communities as vibrant as they can be. No, your sound is gone out. Here, I'll just do this.
Pass this microphone back and forth. When you've done this as long as we have, you inevitably get the bad faith arguments and involving people with disabilities. There is this kind of myth that people with a physical disability are dependent on their car or want to be dependent on their car. And we actually push back on that a little bit. I mean, it's certainly true that certain people have for them, their car is their mobility device. But by designing, again, only for the private automobile, we've built what are known as disabling environments, which leave a lot of people behind. If they do not have the physical ability to drive a car, if they do not have the financial ability to purchase an adapted car, they are, again, much like those other demographics we've mentioned, reliant on others for their mode of transportation. And this becomes another reason to design our streets and our public spaces in a slightly different way. This is a good friend of ours, Maya, who has multiple sclerosis. She lives in Delft as well. When she was diagnosed, her driver's license was taken away. But through the great network of cycling infrastructure and traffic calm streets in our city, she was able to maintain the same quality of life. She was able to drop her kids off at school, to take classes at the local university, to go to the library and grocery store and everywhere in between, simply because of the way that the infrastructure had been designed in an inclusive and intuitive way. So we shouldn't be treating people with disabilities as this amorphous blob with all the same needs and wants, but perhaps going out in the community and talking to them and asking them what they want, instead of letting them be weaponized and used as a reason to prop up the status quo.
So we were chatting a bit about public transport in Elkhart County on the way here, and I recognize this might seem futuristic, but the idea behind it is still, really important in this idea that, like Chris was saying, not everyone can drive with our disabled community, with children, with our older adults. But there can be alternatives to allow them to access the same level of prosperity as those who can and have access to cars. And that's often by thinking about, again, that variety of ways of moving around. And for us in the Netherlands, that's this combination of good walking networks with good cycling and good public transportation, because it allows people an alternative. So for those where owning a car can be quite cost prohibitive, you're giving them other choices. And so it doesn't have to be just for the trip to work. It can be thinking about our kids and getting to school. How can we link up walking and cycling, or public transport where it exists, to get them to those places on their own, to give them that ability to be owners of their own way of moving. But also, thinking of how can we think about this in terms of a county-wide aspect of linking up the trails that can be commuter routes or can take people to the rail in South Bend to get them to Chicago, for example. This is all just an idea of giving people all of the options that can allow for access to education, to employment, to healthcare, to community, in a different way of thinking that allows us to be really reach our full potential as individuals.
And then lastly, we'd like to talk a bit about the social cohesion, social connection that's possible when you reduce the dominance of cars on your streets. I think it's quite obvious that when you're driving in your car, everything else and everyone else is an obstacle, and it's very difficult to connect with your fellow road users when you're wrapped in metal and glass. So the more we can do to kind of break down those barriers, slow speeds down, and encourage people to make these social connections that are often referred to as high moments, and we experience this all the time in Delft. Friends, neighbors, complete strangers bumping into them on the street just to say hello, do a little bit of a catch up. It's not possible in an automobile, and so I think the more we can do in especially today's polarized political climate, to kind of break down some of those silos, get outside of our socio-economic bubble, and get to know our neighbors and our neighborhoods. This becomes another compelling reason to design walking and cycling back into the fabric of our cities.
So with that, we've talked about why, and it's really about, like we hope we've communicated, trying to make sure that everybody, the most of us, get to enjoy this idea of what it means to be in a community. We want to make sure we show you a few examples of what that can look like. We're very fortunate in our work to be able to travel and visit a lot of places, and so we're going to share a few of those examples with you. And what we really want you to take out of this is that, we don't expect you to copy and paste, and we'll show you a myriad examples, but sort of draw inspiration. What is the potential that you could realize in your community based on these examples? And we start in Barcelona, where they have...
Very different climate. From
very different
what we're
climate.
experiencing today.
They experience extreme heat. But there they had this problem where there was a lot of space for cars, but most people in Barcelona are moving around by foot or public transportation. And so by reimagining their neighborhoods in these like massive squares within the residential areas and transforming them into what they call super blocks, they were able to give the community some public space that was much needed. This example here from, San Antonio, that's the neighborhood. I lost it for a second. They do this through very light, quick, cheap methods. So it's just a few planters, some wooden stairs, creating this social space. But the way it was described to us is it is basically this idea of giving Mediterraneans who have very small apartments these wonderful outdoor spaces to spend time. But what happens, there we go, is you create these beautiful public squares that are filled at all times of the day, all times of the year. So we visited these areas both in the spring and the autumn and winter time. And like these ideas of what we were talking about earlier in terms of the why, it's, there are people of all ages enjoying this, there are people of all genders, there's space for play, there's space for, these tables are actually little chess boards where people can come together and play chess. Simply by, reimagining what this could be by slowing traffic, it becomes this wonderful, silent space where more social activity and connectivity can happen. Barcelona is also thinking about their kids, and it's very common here in the US as well, so it might not be a new concept, but they've also introduced a very popular and very successful bike bus as a form of soft protest. So Barcelona is also thinking about how does it build out for cycling better. It's getting there, but it's got some steps to go in terms of making it all ages and abilities accessible. But the bike bus that happens 2 or 3 times a week sees like hundreds of kids come, meet up, have this like joyous moment we got to experience ourselves where you see all these little kids come together and like, oh, what'd you do this weekend? Or what are you going to do tomorrow? And having a wonderful chat and then cycling together to school in a safe and unified way is for us was quite wonderful to experience, but is this wonderful way that we can give that freedom back to kids. And this one's a little bit loud, this video, just warning. But just with some music, some parent volunteers, and then all of the kids on all different types of wheels. So not just bikes, but also scooters and roller skates.
The idea is that they roam through the city along a given route and pick up kids along the way. So it's literally like a bus, but a roaming bike bus that runs 3 days of the week, dependent, of course, on the availability of the parent volunteers.
Yeah. And the one really other lovely thing about this is it's not just getting the kids to school as a community. All of the parent volunteers, also Spanish lifestyle, they all waited afterwards, had a coffee together, and enjoyed catching up before they went on to their daily work. But what we love about it is it's a community building for the kids, but also community building for the parents.
To start work at 10 a.m. like the Barcelonans do. Anyways. So not far from Barcelona, you have the European capital of Brussels. For anyone who's had a chance to visit, it's actually a surprisingly car-dominated city for various reasons, thanks to some post-war American engineers that visited the city and cut some very broad thoroughfares through. I think it's still very much a work in progress, but we've seen a lot of exciting and ambitious initiatives happening there in the last couple of years. The first, or the biggest, has been what is branded as the Good Move project. It's a series of traffic calming measures that have attempted to reduce the amount of unnecessary through traffic that's filtering through the center of Brussels, just by simply adding some filters, some planter boxes that force that through traffic to circumnavigate the center instead of driving through it. They estimated about 40% of the cars that were along a given route in the city center were not destination traffic, they were through traffic, so they were not adding anything to the life or the economy of the city center. So that, in addition to a 30-kilometer-an-hour, 20-mile-per-hour speed limit along a lot of the local residential and commercial streets, made it clear that this was the living room of the city, that this was more of a salon than a corridor, and this was a place where people of Brussels and tourists, of course, could spend their time and their money.
We have a video with this one too.
Yeah, and at the spine of that, of course, you have the Boulevard Anspach, which is was 4 lanes of car traffic just about 8 or 9 years ago. And the local advocates got organized on a Sunday. They had a protest picnic where they literally set up a picnic in the middle of the street. They got the mayor's attention. He agreed to do a pilot project a couple of Sundays, and that pilot proved to be the blueprint of a completely car-free pedestrian street, which has formed the spine of the largest pedestrian network in the EU. But this has only happened in the last 4 or 5 years post-pandemic.
And we showed this video because we did this one in
November?
Because we always get, oh, your pictures are so sunny and beautiful. It was raining and cold for European standards there. They do get snow as well, but this is always open for people, close to traffic. So it can happen even in colder climates as well. There we go. Moving on from there, we'll go to Tirana in Albania. You might not have been hearing a lot about Tirana, but it's this beautiful capital city in Eastern Europe that in the late 80s, early 90s, had a rapid transformation post-communism that was very chaotic with the introduction of more Western ideas, a big adoption of cars, rapid building of homes and businesses that did bring the city up, lift it up in terms of, entering into a more Western economy, but did also mean that children were losing out. And so with this rapid change of space, they weren't thinking about where do kids fit into this. And Albania, or Tirana in itself, is a relatively young city in terms of the demographics. And so a few years back, mayor and council came in that said they wanted to have a child-first approach. They wanted to make sure that their city was a safe place and a wonderful, enjoyable place for children as well. And the first part of that strategy was to build playgrounds, places for play for children. The biggest example being in the Grand Park of Tirana, where they built out an all-ages playground that works for our younger little 6-month-old all the way up to 18 years old, places for them to play that are age-appropriate, and creating this
ping pong tables and basketball
ping pong
courts.
tables, yeah. To create this social environment for kids. And we chose to show this photo, which we have had comments on before because they're on their phones. But for me, you've got these 3 teenage girls in a park without parents, enjoying time together. They might be watching some TikTok videos together, but they're outside. And I think that's a beautiful, emblematic example of what we're trying to create when we talk about this, urban vitality. At the same time, with that child-first approach, they're also creating a number of school streets by reclaiming or redistributing streets that were former traffic sewers, as you like to call them, with cars parked on both sides and cars moving through. And the idea behind this for the mobility minister was that, children have this wonderful, joyous day at school. They're learning, they're with friends, and then they walk out to a sea of cars. And for her, that felt like taking something away from them. So this idea was to give that space back, to create that welcoming environment for kids arriving and departing from school, but also a community asset outside of school hours.
And important to note that this was designed and built in coordination with the kids themselves, so that they chose, how to design this space. They asked them what they wanted, and it cost virtually nothing. I mean, it's a few coats of paint and some planter boxes. It's so low budget, but really effective.
And then part of that child-first strategy is also, as they're building out their cycling network, is to create traffic gardens where kids can learn how to cycle in a safe environment. This one is in that Grand Park that we showed you earlier, where they host, they bring in thousands of kids throughout the year to teach them how to ride a bike safely, how to maintain their bicycle. It's mainly volunteer-driven, but they're quite wonderfully passionate about, bringing that to as many kids as possible, so that the next generation of cyclists has the building blocks to get there.
They can learn how to cycle and learn the rules of the road in a very low-risk environment. Exactly.
And then I don't have that one. That one's later. Go ahead.
Montreal.
Yeah.
Okay. So speaking of winter cities, Montreal is one that's very near and dear to Melissa and I's hearts. Her background is French-Canadian, so we've been visiting there since we were 17 years old. A city I think that's quietly doing a lot of really great urbanism, kind of flying under the radar a little bit, but it really burst onto the scene after the COVID-19 pandemic. And like a lot of cities, the city of Montreal saw this as a low-risk, high-reward opportunity to rethink how they use their streets, to reallocate space, and in this case, to work with the local business community to help them survive. Because that first summer after the pandemic, we obviously had to continue social distancing. We couldn't eat inside, and so what they did in that first summer is they chose 11 commercial arterials across the city in neighborhoods of all incomes and ethnicities, and they worked with the local business community to create permanent pedestrian plazas from May to September, working with local artists to create art installations, terraces, and patios and seating in front of the businesses, pop-up flea markets, and so on and so forth. And again, this became a really light, quick, cheap exercise, but I think a really bold one in terms of rethinking what these traffic sewers that were previously using 4 lanes or moving 4 lanes of car traffic, how they could serve the community differently and serve the business community better. So since that period of time, that first summer, the program has gotten bigger and better. The City Hall continues to invest in these temporary summer streets. Of course, they're May to September. We'd like to see them perhaps embrace a little bit of that winter city status, but proof that what you can do with by building coalitions, working with the business community, and rethinking that space outside of our front door and how it can be put to other uses. At the same time, Montreal's a very flood-prone city. They get a lot of, obviously a lot of snow in the winter, a lot of heavy rainfall in the summertime. So they're very much looking at how they can make these improvements more green. They have a sponge city approach where they're taking former parking lots, parking spaces, and other gray asphalted areas and revegetating them to absorb as much stormwater water as they can to alleviate the peaks on the system, but also to reduce that heat stress during the hot summer months, reduce the urban heat island effect. And so I think this is a very beautiful example of them weaving their mobility infrastructure into their green infrastructure to create what are really, attractive spaces, not just to, of course, cycle through, but to actually spend time in a kind of park-like setting. Paris.
Yes. And then, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about what Paris is doing. Many of you have probably heard a lot of the great work that's been happening throughout Anne Hidalgo's tenure as mayor, and with her team really rethinking what Paris can be, known historically as, well, not historically, but in the last 100 years as a very car-dominated city. If you've had the opportunity to travel there, there's a lot of spaces that can be quite loud and uncomfortable to be in. And knowing that the future of Paris is going to experience more extreme weather, more extreme heat, needed to rethink that. And part of that was the Sweet Street revolution that she has spearheaded with her team to create not just one, not just a dozen, but 200 school streets in a matter of 5 years throughout the city. By closing it to through traffic, creating these wonderful welcome mats for children to arrive and depart, giving kids in the neighborhoods back that ability that we talked about to walk and cycle to school in a space that was formerly very hostile, but at the same time also implementing their own sponge street program, so reintroducing vegetation, understanding that, okay, we have this beautiful paved car-free space for kids to play in and socialize in, but it's going to get really warm, so bringing in trees and other vegetation to allow for shade.
This was also, incidentally, Paris's, sorry to interrupt, their first edible street, so they actually purposely chose, again, along with the community and the children, which specific fruit they wanted to plant along this particular street.
So they're now beautiful corridors. There's a before photo of this that is, again, one of those traffic sewers with cars parked on both sides, very, very gray, very uninviting, and now a beautiful public space. And then, of course, at the same time, Paris has also been expanding their cycling. This is a COVID measure that became a permanent measure. So much like most cities around the world, they had to figure out how do we get Parisians still moving around, especially essential workers, in a safe and physically distanced way. So by reclaiming car lanes, transitioning them to temporary bike lanes is where they started. and then realizing cycling was actually very popular. There was a very latent demand for it in Paris, and making it permanent. This is Rue de Rivoli, right? Yes, because I know we have two different ones. And these are full car lanes in each direction for cycle traffic, and then just one lane for car traffic. Paris still functions very, very well in terms of how people can move in all modes, but now you see this like surge of people cycling, where cyclists now outnumber drivers in the city of Paris. And it's, started out relatively affordably. It was simply just reclaiming that space, reimagining what it could be. You can still see the old markings of where the turn lanes would have been. They've just scrubbed them out and put on bikes instead. But we show this example because, coming from the Netherlands, we hear very often, well, that's all well and good, but, we're not Amsterdam, we're not Delft. Paris 6 years ago was also not this, and now it is. And so it is possible in varying contexts and varying,
And you don't have to get it perfect the first time around. Exactly. Yeah. They just, the boldest step they took was the first one, and over the coming years, they will figure out how to make it more permanent and more beautiful. But for now, it's functional.
Yeah. All right.
So we haven't talked about the Netherlands at all.
No.
We're like more than halfway through our presentation, and we haven't mentioned the Dutch once. That's about to change?
Well, that's not entirely true. We did a little bit.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and we took you on that global tour to get a sense of what's possible in other contexts and climates. But we're going to talk now about the so-called Dutch blueprint for urban vitality that we wrote about in the first book, to give you a sense of how the Netherlands became the cycling paradise that it is. What are the simple and effective policy measures that you can consider for your own context to get to that eventual point? It's not going to happen overnight, but hopefully these are steps that you can take along the way.
And just, one note within that is that a lot of what we'll show you today in terms of that, how to achieve that, these are things that are happening in cities and towns of all sizes. So it's not just a big city thing, but it can be applied in all different geographic contexts. I'm going to change the slide, and now you're looking down.
What? Is this me?
Yeah, it's you.
Okay. Yeah, so the first step, whenever we work with a new city, whenever we sit down with planners for the first time and engineers, we're always encouraging them to think at the network level. Unfortunately, I think today, in the short-termism and the short-term approach that we take, we're always thinking about individual routes, individual corridors, in response to individual incidents and opportunities, and not actually thinking about the trips that people take on a given day, again, as Melissa said, from A to B to C. Try to connect as many of those origins and destinations as possible in a cohesive network rather than one or two disconnected and incoherent cycling routes. So this is something the Netherlands found out in the 1970s in our adopted hometown of Delft, after a couple of demonstration projects in Tilburg and The Hague that were unsuccessful because they were just one cycling path that connected A to B. For the third attempt, the third kick at the can, the national government worked with the city of Delft to build an entire grid of cycling routes. Over a period of 8 years, they connected where people lived and where they worked and where they shopped and where they went to school and where they rode public transport, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And through this network-based approach, they have this blueprint now, which was first applied to cities across the Netherlands, and we now, as we work with cities around the world, that a cycling network has to reflect 5 principles, that it has to be coherent, it has to provide directness, it has to provide safety, comfort, and attractiveness. And if you're checking all 5 of those boxes, you're well on your way to creating a cycling city.
And so when we take these ideas abroad, we can usually come up with a pretty good, pretty robust network. But one of the key things that we want to emphasize in every single talk, every single presentation, workshop, is that we can't forget the weakest link, and that weakest link is our intersections. And so when cities are designing their cycling networks, they need to think about how do they now intersect with each other? How do we make sure that people can navigate safely? It looks very different in different contexts throughout the Netherlands. You'll have roundabouts like this that are completely protected, where cycling is prioritized to move through, which might sound counterintuitive if we're talking about allowing cars that freedom to move. We don't want them to back up. But these are actually super functional, because if there's no cars, people still get to move, or no bikes, sorry, the cars get to move freely. But when bikes are there, they can move comfortably and safely through the intersection. You also have protected examples there are examples of that in the US as well. But even right down to the neighborhood level, if we're talking about two neighborhood streets meeting, how can we change the geometry of that space in a way that allows cars to be more aware, drivers to be more aware that there will be people walking and cycling through. They'll either raise a crossing, or they'll make it continuous, or just slow the traffic to a way that we can get back to that point where we enjoy our neighborhoods. Kids can walk safely to their school or just play with each other on the streets in a way that we don't have to fear for them. And so really thinking about where that intersection happens has been a big part of the success of the Dutch cycling story.
So you have the carrot, if you will, to make cycling and other alternatives to the car very attractive. We can't forget about this proverbial stick, the disincentive. And this is one thing that cities in the Netherlands do quietly very well, is actually to make driving a car a little bit indirect and inconvenient, much like the example we cited in Brussels, understanding that not every street in every neighborhood should provide or design and accommodate through traffic, that sometimes it's okay to design your streets in a way to push the through traffic to more peripheral areas of your neighborhood and city, and to reserve those streets for different functions, for staying and spending time rather than for passing through. And that really is reflected in the city centers all across the Netherlands. Most cities, including Delft, have adopted what are called autolu, or low car policies, where the only car traffic that's allowed to enter is residents and freight and service delivery vehicles. And then everybody else has to park more on the outskirts of the center and enter by foot or bicycle to, again, reserve that space as more of the living room of the city, and to keep the through traffic from impacting the safety, the comfort, and those stay functions of those streets. Not every street in your city has to be a flow street.
Next is to design for the behavior that you want. And we talked about this today in a couple of the meetings that we've had locally, from a North American context, a lot of our streets are designed to maximize flow, to get cars moving through the space as comfortably as possible, usually with a little bit too wide of travel lanes, with minimal stops along the way. But if we really want to create those spaces where people want to stay, then we need to adjust our thinking of how they're designed in our residential communities, in our city centers. And that's usually done from a Dutch perspective by narrowing these travel lanes, by reducing them and then narrowing them. By using things like texture or chicanes, which is when we force drivers to not drive in a straight line, but rather more of a serpentine fashion. It inherently clicks in our psychology that we need to behave differently. We can't just keep driving at the same speed, because if we do that, we might damage our car, we might hurt somebody, and so we automatically start to adjust our behavior. And really, that's what we talk about when we're traveling, is you need to design not just by posting up a speed limit and saying this is how fast you should go, but really thinking about how can we change the appearance of the street that allows for the behavior to adjust. In this case, this is a normal, it's not an arterial, but it is a relative through street.
Moves close to 20,000 cars a day?
Yeah, but by putting this textured strip in the middle, by creating that mid-crossing waiting area, you change the geometry of the street, where if a car happens to travel over it, that rumble noise will trigger, ooh, I'm not supposed to be in this space, or seeing I have to turn, I'm going to need to slow down a little bit to do that. And so these little tricks that we can play to just force everyone to behave in the way that moves everyone a little more comfortably.
Yeah, I think the way it was best said to us is, and this is a very different approach than is applied in North America, is while the North Americans try to create the perfect road user, the Dutch are busy trying to create the perfect road environment and trying to make the system change rather than the individuals, accepting that people will break rules willingly and unwillingly, and to create forgiving infrastructure that minimizes the impact of those mistakes and that rule breaking. Okay. Fifth, and certainly not least, is this bike transit intermodality that Melissa's already mentioned, and we could spend an entire day on this topic. It is truly fascinating the way that the Dutch managed to make cycling an extension of their public transport system, to feed more passengers into their public transport system, to extend the range of their public transport, simply by enabling cycling to the stop or the station, and then providing cycling as a last mile solution on the other end of the journey. So we bookend the public transport ride on a tram, bus, or train with a cycle ride, and we provide this door-to-door convenience over distances of, 100 plus kilometers. This is my daily commute from, or bi-daily commute from Delft to Utrecht. I cycle to the station, park my bike at the station, take the train to Utrecht, and then rent a share bike on the other side of the journey. Don't need a car, it's quite affordable, and it's quite time competitive. And the two systems really work in synergy with each other to create more public transport riders, but also to put more cyclists on the cycle path and provide this very affordable alternative to the car for people who can't necessarily afford to drive or have access to a car.
All right, so we've talked about why, we've talked about what it looks like, and how to design for it. I think it's important to understand, as we close out, what is the role of leadership in achieving this? And this is sort of, spoiler a little bit of what the third book is about, is how leadership plays a role in the design of our cities. And in writing Women Changing Cities, we traveled to 11 different places. We met with 19 different women to sort of understand what were the secret ingredients to the success that they had been able to achieve in their cities. And out of that came 5 lessons or 5 qualities of leadership that we really should be celebrating and lifting up. While the book is called Women Changing Cities, we don't by any stretch believe that these leadership qualities are solely inherent in women. They are, for lack of better ways of saying it, very gender neutral. Men and women both have these qualities. We've seen countless leaders exemplify them. And what we hope is that in hearing this, it resonates. These are not just tools for political leaders or elected officials, but rather all of us in leadership in our communities. And the first one is to lead with empathy. And as Chris likes to say, this seems like a radical act now at this point in time. But really, it just comes down to this idea that for those of us that are designing or in decision-making positions or advocating, sometimes we need to check our egos and what we know to be likely the best solution and actually talk to communities and find out what they want. Go to the people that aren't coming out to our public meetings and really listen to what it is that they value in their public space, what they want in terms of how they move around, and then how can we facilitate that. And it often involves talking to people outside of our bubble, outside of our urbanist world, because they have a different perspective than we do. And the anecdote that we like to share is that, it shouldn't take experiencing it for ourselves and for us to have that empathy. And we were at a session and listening to the mayor in Brussels talk about how, he suddenly realized the city should be different because he was pushing around a stroller with his child in it. And that's great, and we want to celebrate that, and we're glad that he learned that, but it shouldn't take him having a child and having to move them around to learn that we need to think about how other caregivers are moving around. And so this idea of empathy is really taking a step back and understanding we need to listen and we need to learn from each other to have the greatest success.
And then the second quality that we identified was every single woman we spoke to was not thinking within the current political cycle. They didn't have this short-term approach that I mentioned earlier. They were thinking beyond even their own lives. And this adage, that we're planting seeds for trees under which we will not enjoy the shade of. And we heard a lot of that today in our conversations and our meetings. This vision for a world-class trail network that could connect Chicago to think big and to think long-term, and you may not accomplish that this year or this decade, but to know that's where you want to get to and keep your North Star there without compromising for short-term gain.
The next quality, and we harp on this a lot in our presentations, this idea of caregiving and the work of care. A lot of the projects that we have shown today and a lot of the ones that we talk about in all three of our books really come from this understanding that caregiving plays an essential role in how we all function. We can't leave the house without somebody performing some act of care for us, and this is all the unpaid work that is the foundation of everything that we do everywhere. And so the more that we value that in our public spaces and designing and thinking about that in terms of not just how we move, but how we stay, the better the more vibrant these public spaces become, simply by thinking this is not just about economic drivers, but also about, providing for the work of care, but the people that make up our communities.
And then we have, again, I think a very poignant idea in the current political climate, but a lot of the cities that we visited, the women there, the leaders there, were able to really, I think, break through this left-right culture war that we find ourselves locked in, to reach out across the aisle and to work with the business community, with so-called political opponents, because I think we do actually have a lot of common ground at the end of the day. We've heard this in countless meetings over the last week and a half, that the values that we talked about in terms of building child-friendly communities, in terms of building age-friendly communities, instead of in terms of designing for livability and improving the local economy, these are not so-called progressive issues or left-wing issues. These are universal values that I think a lot of us could share and find common ground on. We can disagree a little bit about how to get there, but at the end of the day, I think we actually have a lot more in common than we perhaps believe.
And then last but not least, in all of the leaders that we talked to, it was this idea of prioritizing what kind of impact they can have on their communities over maintaining power. And this seemed to be a very critical thing, because it was about making the unpopular decision, or presumably unpopular decision, because they knew it was the right thing to do. Whether it meant that they wouldn't get reelected if they were in an elected official position, or it meant that they would only sit in their tenure in their job for a small amount of time. They knew that's why they were there. That was the job they were hired to do, and that was what they were going to do. In the case of Anne Hidalgo, that you see here on the screen, referred to as our Lord and Savior, Anne Hidalgo by some people, this is essentially what she did. You know, if she had listened to the loudest voices in Paris, Paris would not look the way it does today. It would not have cycle lanes. It would not be transforming big squares into public parks. But by knowing that is what was silently very popular, and it was just the right thing to do, that is how Paris has been able to achieve what they've done. But also understanding when it's time to step down. In the case of Anne Hidalgo, in the case of Valérie Plante in Montreal, knowing that they had spent all the energy they had, and it was time to move aside and make space for new energy to come in, new ideas. That is the strength of a lot of these cities in terms of how they've progressed, and a lot of the places that we get to visit is just understanding that we don't need to sit in one space for as long as possible and hold on to that power, that it's just as important to recognize when you need to step away. Would you like to add anything?
No, beautifully said.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So we've been on a journey. That was 3 books and 15 years of work stretched down into 40 minutes. Thanks for coming along for the ride. You thought you were coming to hear about bikes. We covered a lot of ground in between. The books, 2 of the 3 books are available for sale out in the lobby.
The third one's available for pre-sale.
The third one is available for pre-sale. It's currently on a boat somewhere crossing the Atlantic Ocean. But we're happy, of course, to sign and pre-sign the pre-sale books as well. If you want to follow along on our continued global adventures, please follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. Did I forget anything? I mean,
There might be some questions, so we have time for questions.
yes, absolutely. But thank you very much for your attention. This has been an absolute pleasure, and happy to chat more about the local issues and any burning questions you might have. Thank you.
So do we put the questions up here, or how does it? Okay.
So the coalition staff will get back to those of you who've asked local questions afterwards.
A few weeks ago, Europe got hammered with weather, some really severe storms, and I, read in the news about Netherlands. I don't read about Netherlands every day, but the airport was shut down and electricity was dropped. And so, what did the Netherlands learn in that experience?
Yeah.
That might apply here, by the way.
Yeah. And so for those of you who didn't see, the Netherlands got 2 or 3 inches of snow in the entire country, ground to a halt for almost a week. And as a couple of Canadians, we couldn't help but just laugh. Schiphol Airport had 3,000 flights canceled, the train system ground to a halt. Yeah, and it is just, I think, from the conversations we had, a series of budget cuts over the years, the cost-benefit analysis that the government did, it wasn't cost-effective for them to keep this equipment for snow clearing and de-icing for the less frequent times that they happen. In the 7 years that we've lived there, this is kind of the second dumping of snow we've had over that period of time. What have they learned? I mean, I hope that to make these investments, because people still have to move. The cycling infrastructure was very inconsistent, I'll be perfectly honest, from city to city. The clearing of the cycle paths came down to the municipalities that prioritized it. In the case of Delft, we didn't see very much evidence of that. They kind of had the approach, well, let's just wait for it to melt, to our immense frustration, so we didn't get on our bikes the entire period of time. But then we saw in Amsterdam, Utrecht, and other Dutch cities where perhaps they did prioritize it, they did have the budget and the equipment, they cleared the cycle paths fairly quickly, and there were good numbers using them. Not everybody necessarily, but enough to justify their clearance. So please, yeah.
Okay. While working for various firms, we have done, over my years, I have been able to work with a lot of North American cities that get a lot of snow. And the big response to that is, sure, we can build bike lanes, but how do we keep them clear? And it's really, as Chris mentioned, it comes down to budgeting. It can be just a line item in city budgets, but it shouldn't be one that, okay, we're getting warmer, maybe we don't need it, or we don't get as much severe snow, because we will still have those events. And I think that's the big learning, hopefully, that the Netherlands takes away, is that, yeah, okay, maybe 20 years ago they used to get more snow, and now they don't need as much equipment, but it's still being able to plan for those eventualities, because it's going to happen more and more. It might not happen in the same sort of sustained experience as it might have 20 years ago, but we need to have that. And, taking it back to the presentation and our experience in Delft, the reason we didn't cycle is because the last time there was a massive dumping of snow, we did cycle, and I fell and I broke my leg. And I wasn't able to cycle or walk with crutches I could walk, but it was very difficult for 8 weeks. And so in that 8-week period, I was limited to a very small home zone. And I think that's my personal experience, so that's influenced how I move, but there's probably countless people in our communities, regardless, who they see that snow and they're not going outside. And so that's where we need to take into account sidewalk clearance, bike lane clearance if you have it, and really budgeting for that to make sure that even in snowfall periods, people aren't losing that access to the community. And I think that's the message that really needs to be driven home, is it's about that access regardless of if they get in a car or not.
I had 2 questions that I sent in, so I'll tell you. When you were talking about Montreal, describing the street that had switched from being cars to being bikes and pedestrians only, I was really curious the stories you heard in the merchants along that street, the transition that they encountered, or Paris would probably have some other examples, or anyway, I'm trying to think of some things that would help illustrate maybe some of the changes that they felt, either the negative or positive. And the other one was, I noticed in a lot of your photos, I didn't see particularly when you had an elder person riding tricycles, which would be adult size and could really help, utility bikes, or different other transports of getting things around, and especially electric bikes. I'm curious about how these other cities have sort of controlled that, because as you get electric, you're getting more and more speed capacity and all sorts of other things that are I'm just curious how that has been managed in some of these scenarios. So two little different categories for you.
Yeah. Which question do you want? All right. Yeah. So in the case of Montreal, what's interesting, and Chris kind of alluded to it, but it was actually the businesses that asked for the streets to asked for some kind of intervention because they were losing money during COVID. They didn't have people coming and spending time and spending money in restaurants and shops, and so this was in part an economically driven project that the city helped to support to create these spaces. And what they see, and the reason that it's continued since 2020 to now, and growing in terms of the length of time it's in place and the length of the street opening, is because they're seeing that economic return. Of course, you've got the patios that come out, but you see businesses retail businesses extending their retail floor into the public space. And you're seeing also pop-up food vendors coming along. So there is this. Yeah. You want to talk about that? Because
No, so the Business Improvement Association provides these electric rickshaws for people to shuttle up and down the street. So they've really been proactive in terms of their outreach and not just with the business community, but with the broader community, to make sure that they're maximizing the winners and minimizing the losers of this policy. And I think you're always going to get dissenting voices, but they were confident they had enough of a consensus along these corridors. The BIAs represent the communities, and they were able to speak on behalf of the businesses to move forward.
BIA an acronym that you all understand? Business Improvement.
Like Chamber of Commerce, or so it's like the network of all the businesses along that given street.
That acronym's different everywhere I've been. That's why I asked the question. But
Yeah, and then.
That's sort of, and generally speaking, in most of the cities where you see this happening, even if it's not driven by the business community, they see the economic benefit. And one of the best examples actually is in Vancouver. Their Downtown Business Improvement Association was fervently against all of the bike lanes downtown when we were living there. And this idea of empathy and outreach, they actually reached out to downtown businesses and residents, asked them what they want, and they were told resoundingly, we want more bike lanes, and they did a complete about-face, recognizing the potential that existed economically, but also in terms of drawing more people to come and live and spend money downtown. All right, you can take over.
So electrification is, a really interesting discussion. It's now, despite the fact that the Netherlands is flat and compact, a third of all the bicycles in the country are electric assist. But when I say electric assist, it means there's no throttle. They are pedal assisted, and they are speed limited to 25 kilometers, 18 miles per hour or so. They've changed cycling completely. They've doubled the range of cycling. They've made it more accessible to older people. The 50-plus generation were the early adopters of the e-bike. And so they've been certainly a boon in terms of welcoming new people into cycling and extending the range of cycling. They've also created this very difficult challenge now in the congested city centers, where you have a lot more e-bikes, food delivery drivers, fat tire bicycles, cargo bikes, and that mix on the cycle path is becoming quite stressful and dangerous. And so this has become one of the main focuses of a lot of cities in the Netherlands, is to try to figure out how we now make all of those micro-mobilities coexist. But to your point, the tricycle, it's the diversity of bikes, and we don't even call them bikes, because they're no longer just two-wheeled devices. They're hand-powered cycles, recumbent cycles, tricycles. There's diverse quadricycles. They're all as diverse as the people that use them. And there are companies in the Dutch Cycling Embassy Network that specialize in adapted cycles for people with disabilities, and they've just opened up cycling to virtually everybody now, even if you can't maintain your balance or you don't feel confident maintaining your balance. So it's, and a lot of these now are, of course, now also electric assist to give that extra boost. But it's, the challenge, of course, is making that cycle path feel welcoming to everybody who wants to use it and not allowing the more dominating, fast, heavier road users push the more vulnerable cyclists out of that space.
One of the things we talked about today in terms of the trail networks around here is similar to what we talked about in terms of the road spaces, designing for the behavior you want. And so if the trails are meant to be like a recreational, enjoyable space, thinking about those users and, you know, maybe future-proofing for allowing for trikes or allowing for pedal assist e-bikes, because you will have eventually people that want to travel, you know, 25, 30, 40 miles by bike, and they might be more willing to do that with an electric bike, but just doing that in a way that those that are moving slower still feel comfortable. So thinking about that space now, so that when it becomes a future problem, you're not trying to reclaim more space and reframe or redraw the whole map kind of thing.
Hi, I'm Jake with iDart Studio here on behalf of Vibrant Communities, and I want to thank you guys for taking a few minutes for me before your presentation. In my job, I talk to a lot of people from different communities, and it struck me that just earlier this morning I was talking to someone, interviewing someone in a different part of the state, a very conservative part of the state, an agricultural area, and talking about a kind of a new playground that they're expanding. And the exact same language which was used, which is getting our children outside and getting them unplugged from their devices. And it just strikes me that it's very strange and unusual to hear kind of like common language. America's really divided right now. And I wonder if this type of initiative is something that could be a binding initiative in terms of communities, people coming together from different backgrounds. It seems like everyone could agree that maybe this is something worth pursuing. Could you comment on that?
Well, when we tell the story of the Netherlands as a cycling country, we start with children because they were the ones that ultimately, in the 1970s, were put on the front lines of the protest movements that pushed back against the rise of the car in their communities. The literal phrasing of their protest movement was in Dutch, "Stop the kindermoord," stop the child murder, which is, I think, brutal and very direct, very Dutch in its directness. But it was very effective because at that time, 500 children per year were being killed by cars. This was a newspaper editor who, his daughter was tragically killed on her cycle ride to school in the morning, and he wrote this, poured all of his grief and his anger into this front page editorial with the headline, "Stop the Kindermoord." And so we saw in Amsterdam, in Utrecht, in cities across the Netherlands, children were put on the front lines, families rose up and they said, "We want a different future than the one that you're selling us in terms of, we can see the space that we're losing for walking, for cycling, for playing." And it worked. And I think what we're seeing now, 50 years later, is a similar child-led movement happening in a lot of cities. A lot of the initiatives that we highlighted on the screen and a lot of the ones that we write about, they're centered around children. And I think it's twofold, the reasoning behind that. I think, in today's political climate, I think children are the one rare thing that we can hopefully all agree on. But also, of course, we're trying to spark the imaginations and in the next generation, and to show them that they can move around their city in a different way and get to school in a different way. So the bike bus movement, the school streets movement, all of these, the traffic gardens, all of these initiatives, I think in a lot of ways they are the breakthrough that we need to kind of get through this inertia and this stasis that we see in our cities and regions. And it's a brave politician that would show up against something like that, I think, because it's a very easy thing to support. And like I said, these are values that we can all agree on. We may disagree a little bit about how to get there, but I think kids should and could be a child-led movement, could be the focus point that we need. And the bike bus movement that we see embodies that. I mean, it's just incredible to see the way it's spreading around the world, and getting all kinds of mainstream news coverage. I know Justin Timberlake rode the one in Portland.
Benson Boone.
And Benson Boone, yeah, he was the other one that I was thinking about. Sorry, my pop culture's not up to, yeah. But no, I think great point, great question, and if we're going to bridge that aisle, I think kids are probably the one point that we can all agree on.
I have nothing to add.
Perfect.
I feel like here in the US, parking is a big thing. I'll talk to my girlfriends, hey, let's go out for dinner. Oh, that place doesn't have great parking. I don't want to go there. And when we think about the space that parking takes up in a city like a main street, what it could be converted to, how do you overcome that convenient parking thing that I think for all of us that are forced to drive cars, I still kind of want convenient parking. How do we handle that?
I don't know. I mean, we are creatures of convenience and pragmatism, right? And it's, we choose, when we're talking about why should we get more people on bikes and how do we do that? Well, make it pragmatic and convenient. With parking, it's kind of the antithesis of that. We need to make it a little bit uncomfortable. But it's not necessarily that we're making it uncomfortable to arrive, but we're just saying, hey, it's okay if you walk like, what's 500 meters? About a quarter mile to get, it's like maybe less, maybe it's around the corner. And I think the successful strategies we've seen in terms of parking reallocation have really emphasized that. Like, we're not taking away parking, we're just putting it over here to create a better public space. And I think that's the narrative that works best is, okay, it might be more convenient for you if you had parked in front here, but everyone else wants to do that as well. So now you're going to be fighting for space and driving around, and rather we've created this space for you for parking, and then the rest is just walking and seeing your community and that reconnection. You're not going to convince everybody, but it is, I think, that narrative building and the messaging is a great place to start. And that is one thing that North America does really well, is lots of surface parking and lots of parking garages. So it's not like there's not somewhere else to park. We just need to reimagine what our main streets can look like and our community areas, and try to shift people's values into valuing that community connection as opposed to that convenient parking space. And we see it happening in some cities. It takes a little bit of time, but all those parklets that happened throughout the US and throughout Canada and other places during COVID. Yeah, do all you know what a parklet is? No, okay, sorry. This is what we do for a living, Anyway, so a parklet is basically like a temporary, starting out as a temporary sort of reclamation of one parking space using like what's the word I'm looking for? Shit. I mean, it could be anything. Yeah, but it could be just like, wooden slats on on the parking space, and you put up some chairs and planters. We've seen like cafes will take over a parking space in front of their spot and make a little extra patio. That's kind of the word I'm looking for. And it's just reimagining what that parking space could be. For those that maybe aren't familiar, there's this great movement that actually started in San Francisco called Parking Day, where at the initial launch of it was simply just people paying a parking meter and putting out some carpeting and some chairs, board games, and just doing something different in a parking space to help people understand how it could be used differently. And now we see that much more, not permanent, but a little more organized in terms of how cities at least did it during COVID and how you see them doing it further to that. So it's not an easy step forward. But it really is just helping people understand a different way of seeing seeing it as public space as opposed to just parking space.
I think we have time for one more question. Got one right up here.
Joan Willems. Hello. I have a question about the the hectic pace that Americans live in. I've been in the Netherlands and I've seen women go to work with their skirts flowing on the bicycle and the high heels. But how do you slow people down here to plan for a 15-minute drive to something or a half-hour drive to work and then pick up the kids and go to this thing and that thing? It sounds like it'll be a hard sell to get people to slow down.
Yeah, well, everything that we're talking about is a culture shift or behavior change that it takes time. And we might, like Chris said earlier, we might not get to enjoy that slower pace or that different way of living. But we're, essentially planting these seeds now. And this is where I think we really emphasize it's not about changing all trips to cycling and walking and public transport, but trying to shift some. And we were talking about it earlier, about how most of the trips in the U.S.
Half of all the car trips in the United States of America are under 3 miles. We're not, again, going to convert all of those journeys, but I would say 15 or 20% of those trips could be replaced if we just give people choices. And right now, the line from our second book is Americans have 1,000 choices when it comes to breakfast cereal, but 1 when it comes to their form of transportation. At the end of the day, it's just about giving them a suite of tools that they can choose from. A bowl, a bucket, a spoon. You don't always use a bucket for everything. Austin, yeah, I mean, Austin did exactly that, and this was a very concerted effort by the city. They were able to, through the traffic modeling data, create a heat map where those short car trips were taking place, the corridors and intersections where those 3 mile and under journeys were happening, and then plan their cycling network to overlap with those corridors and intersections with the specific goal of capturing 15% to the bicycle just by providing an alternative. So this becomes a very data-based approach. You're not just going on feelings, you actually have facts, and now with artificial intelligence and digital twins and all this technology at our fingertips, we can actually build infrastructure that's meeting the way that people are moving or want to move, and not just throwing some infrastructure down and hoping for the best. That's a bit of a
Yeah. But I think, the biggest thing is it's not necessarily shifting all journeys, like we said, but really it's, what we experienced ourselves with our friends and peers in Vancouver and what we see when we travel around is oftentimes when we create this comfortable space for walking and cycling, it invites 1 or 2 new people to do it. They see how enjoyable it is, and they might change or shift a few of their trips that are realistic, that pragmatism I referred to. But it's just this, it's like 1 drop becomes 2, becomes like a whole ripple effect. And that's really what we're trying to inspire is shift one of those journeys by making it more comfortable, and then they'll tell a friend, and they'll, suddenly you'll have the entire community on the Pumpkin Vine Trail enjoying a Sunday afternoon or even a Tuesday morning. But it's really just creating that spark that inspires people to move a little bit differently.
I want to thank you both for making the journey across the Atlantic to be with us tonight. And thank you all for taking time out of your evening to be here. I want to remind you that their Fables is right outside in the lobby. They've got books, and Melissa and Chris have generously said that they'll sign them for you. So with that, let's give them a round of applause. And have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone.